Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Bridget McNulty. I am the CEO and co-founder of Sweet Life Diabetes Community. We are a nonprofit and a public benefit organization with a single focus to empower South Africans with diabetes through community and education. So this evening is 100% what I care about when it comes to Sweet Life, because we're talking about continuous glucose monitoring, but specifically about why continuous glucose monitoring accuracy matters. So it's really about empowering you, the individual, about how to choose your best CGM. We have an amazing panel here this evening. We're going to bring them on stage now. We are joined by Dr. Priyanka Singh from FIND, Dr. Patrick Ngasa Pioti from the Diabetes Alliance, and Kirsten de Klerk from SA Diabetes Advocacy. Thank you so much for joining and welcome, everyone. I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves, just briefly who you are, where you're from, and why CGM matters to you. Patrick, do you want to get us started?
Thank you, Bridget. Good evening, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. I'm Patrick Ngasa Pioti. I'm chairperson of the Diabetes Alliance here in South Africa. I'm also affiliated with the University of Pretoria as a public health specialist and researcher. CGM, I believe, is a game changer when it comes to diabetes monitoring, not only for the precision of result that it can provide, so that obviously to allow closer monitoring, but also and more importantly for the quality of life. The improvement or impact on the quality of life is critical, whether you're considering a child or a kid living with diabetes, or even an adult who has a busy life and doesn't have always time to prick to get a sense of the glucose sugar. So I do believe that is quite of a revolution when it comes to diabetes management. That's why I'm interested about the CGMs. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Patrick. Priyanka?
Hi, Bridget. Hi, good evening to you and to my co-panelists and everyone who's watching this discussion. My name is Dr. Priyanka Singh, and I'm a scientist based here in Geneva within the NCD program at FIND. FIND is a Swiss foundation and is focused on improving access to affordable and quality diagnostics in low-resource settings. And so why CGM accuracy matters, it is because it directly affects the safety of the patients, of the people who are using it. It directly affects, the way that the people trust this technology. So it builds that confidence. It's very important in that sense. And so that the people who are using it can also make informed decisions about the use and to how to manage their care. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. And Kirsten, our host from SA Diabetes Advocacy.
My name is Kirsten de Klerk. I am, as Bridget said, chairperson of SA Diabetes Advocacy. And I've also been living with type 1 diabetes for the last 15 years. And I've been using a continuous glucose monitor probably now for the last 5 years of my diabetes management. And CGM accuracy and CGMs have had a huge impact on the way that I live my life with diabetes, the way that I understand how every little thing really can affect your glucose levels. And it's really just given me, this powerful tool that's given me the ability to really navigate my journey with diabetes, to better my relationship with diabetes, and to understand what's really going on with my body on a day-to-day basis. So we'll go deeper into why CGM accuracy is so important, because I think we all are a little bit familiar with the continuous glucose monitoring technology, although it is fairly new to South Africa and fairly low access in terms of people having access to it. But I think, today's topic is going to be really important. I'm excited to get into it.
So I just want to welcome everyone who's watching. You can also ask questions of this amazing panel. It is a rare and beautiful opportunity to have these three powerhouses in one virtual room. So feel free to write a comment and I will bring it up as a question for our panelists. I have a bunch of questions for them, so I'm going to be keeping them very busy, but I also want to make sure that any questions you have will be answered. So as Kirsten said, we're not just talking about CGM, we're talking about CGM accuracy. So Kirsten, you've been living with diabetes for 15 years. Why does CGM accuracy matter to you?
So CGM accuracy matters to me because, these wonderful tools came along and they are wonderful. They really, it changed the whole trajectory of my life with diabetes. And the thing that I use my continuous glucose monitor for is to make my daily decisions when it comes to diabetes management. So the first thing I do when I wake up is check my glucose levels. And with CGM technology now advancing, we have these wonderful systems that alert us or send alarms to our phones. And that really is a signifier throughout my day, my busy life, whether I'm hiking with friends on a weekend, enjoying a social dinner with friends, working or presenting, or even being on this conversation right now. My phone is now really a life-saving tool that alerts me whether I'm having a high glucose event or a low glucose event, and it allows me to have a lot more brain capacity in my day to live my life, rather than continuously think about what my glucose levels could be doing. And really the reason why CGM accuracy is so important, because I want to know that I can trust the numbers that my continuous glucose monitor is giving me. I want to know that if it's telling me I'm having a low glucose event, that I really am actually having a low glucose event, or that I'm very close to having a low glucose event. And similar, if I'm going to be having a high glucose event, I want to know that I'm going to be treating these high and low glucose events correctly. The other thing that I think the first thing that I thought about when it came to CGM accuracy and when this actually started coming up was my concern for the risk now as a person living with diabetes. And that for me specifically is low glucose events. We are at quite a high risk of low glucose events throughout our day-to-day management of living with diabetes. And if not corrected in time, we know that can lead to circumstances such as diabetic ketoacidosis or just really, really dangerous low glucose event episodes. So that's something that I'm really nervous about. And if your CGM is not reading correctly, or it's giving higher readings than it should, then you could be missing those really crucial moments in which you need to correct. And then I didn't really think about the long-term impact. But let's say, a lot of doctors recommend that you need to be at a 70% time in range to lower your long-term complication risk. And let's say your CGM is actually running at 10% lower than that. So your whole life, you could be sitting at 60% time in range. And when you're a bit older, you could be facing those longer term complications that you were told that you wouldn't have to have to overcome in the future because you stayed within your 70% time in range. So I think now looking at the long term of what CGM accuracy impact could have, as well as what's happening right now in your day-to-day diabetes management, as a person living with diabetes, that's where my main concerns lie.
And I love that you're able to come to this also from your own personal lived experience, but also from the community perspective, which is so valuable, that you're not just speaking for yourself, but you're speaking for all the people that you've interviewed and all the people you've spoken to, particularly with the CGM petition that you recently presented. Someone said to me last week, I think it was Holly Ray, said, it's so funny that as people with diabetes were sent home with a lethal drug and just told to off you go, best wishes, good luck with that. And you inject too much, because if your CGM tells you need to inject and you take a large dose of insulin, and if that's not accurate, that's super dangerous. And if your CGM tells you that you're low and you take a lot of sugar to correct that, that's super dangerous. And so it feels like type 1 diabetes a lot of the time feels like we're walking this tightrope. And how do we manage to safely navigate the tightrope? And the only way we do that is if we have the most accurate possible readings. So Yolanda has just preempted my next question, which I love. She said, how do we trust the technology available on the market? And that is such an important question. And I was actually going to throw this one at Priyanka. You're a scientist, Priyanka, so you get the hard question. And I love that you have this kind of global CGM and scientific perspective. We've seen this growing market of low-cost CGMs entering South Africa and other lower middle income countries, which is wonderful, right? We want things to be as affordable and accessible as possible. But how do we balance that affordability with the need to protect people from inaccurate or unsafe devices? How do we trust the technology?
Yeah, no, thank you, Bridget, for that question, and Yolanda for that very important question as well. As I mentioned earlier, that why CGM matters, why CGM accuracy matters, is the trust that the people who are living with the condition and using the CGM should be able to trust the device. And just to state that affordability and safety shouldn't be seen as competing goals. They have to advance together. If CGMs are truly going to expand access in low resource settings. So low-cost CGMs can be game-changing in LMICs, and we have seen evidence for that. There is clear clinical evidence for that, where many people benefit from the continuous monitoring, but still can't have access to it. So it's like a double-edged sword. But a device that's inexpensive yet inaccurate or hard to use isn't a solution, right? It can lead to dangerous treatment decisions and erode the trust in the technology as a whole. So affordability must mean affordable and reliable enough to keep people safe. The balance really comes from, setting clear minimum performance expectations, insisting on transparent, independent evidence before rolling out the devices at scale. Like, for example, procurement is a powerful lever that we can, the governments and partners can use to, require where it can require like baseline accuracy, usability, and safety data. And manufacturers have to design those based on those expectations. And because these devices are meant for lay users, it's not just about how a sensor performs in a controlled study. It's really about the people in the real world who can apply and wear it and interpret it in real life. So strong usability testing in the real world settings with clear instructions on how to use it, how to understand it, how to read it, and systems that also identify weaknesses early are essential. The alerts that Kirsten was talking about, they're so amazing, literally saving lives. But if they are wrong, then that can lead to really that can really damage the life of a person, the quality of life of a person. So, and once, devices are on the market, we need ongoing vigilance. So that's another point that I wanted to add was, we have the devices in the market, but we also need strong post-market surveillance or vigilance in the market where, good products can behave differently in various climates and populations. So, a very good simple feedback channel, hotlines, or even small, sentinel evaluation sites that can help catch issues early and maintain trust. That trust word keeps coming back, right? So if we combine affordability with minimum standards, independent evaluations, and real-world monitoring, we can welcome much-needed innovation without compromising on safety. So ensuring that people get access to CGMs that are both accessible and genuinely protective of their health.
And that's such a good point you make about the usability factor, because a lot of the time, particularly if we're talking widespread access in low middle income countries, English is probably not the first language. Digital literacy and health literacy are potentially both stumbling blocks. So it has to be something that can be trusted and incorporated in a way that feels kind of seamless. So it's quite a list of requirements we are asking for here.
It is.
It's our lives that we're playing with, so we need it. So Patrick, I am looking at you for a policy and a clinical perspective. We're seeing huge growth in CGM availability globally and also here at home in South Africa. So I want to know what excites you about this and what concerns you about this. You're on mute. Someone's always on mute. Hey, I feel like we should start having like an award for the first time you say you're on mute in a meeting.
Thanks, Bridget, for the question. Indeed, from a clinical perspective, obviously, as I said earlier, access to CGM is really critical because it provides that visibility and that close monitoring and ensuring that the glucose levels are where we want them to be. But at the same time, I like really the topic of accuracy. And as I was listening to the colleagues, I was picturing a pilot who is in a plane, is supposed to land the plane at OR Tambo, but whatever readings he's having there on his dashboard are completely inaccurate. Unfortunately, he lands maybe on the highway or on a shopping mall. So yeah, it seems a bit, but that's the reality, whereby you want to know that you are trusted, what you are reading, it's accurate and it's taking you where you want to be. You don't want to enter your car, put your GPS hoping to go to your mom and find yourself in one of the unsavory neighborhoods in your country. So yes, it's really critical that as the access is increasing, obviously business people are not always ethical, and they can see that this is a game changer. They can see that there is appetite for this device. So sometimes, unfortunately, driven by profit and greed, they might want to cut corners. So that's why it's important. I like the fact that the conversation is also occurring here in South Africa. I think we need to elevate this kind of conversation to SAPRA, the regulating body, because unfortunately, when it comes to technology, we've been sometimes more reactive than proactive. We can see that this is coming and it's been there for a number of years, but we are not sure that the regulatory bodies are already a step ahead on what is coming. So yeah, indeed, it's really important that as we are wanting to have more access, looking from a low and middle income countries perspective, as Priyanka said, we don't want to sacrifice quality. We don't want to sacrifice accuracy for just the sake of just having the device available. So I'm really all on board, and I think whether from an advocacy perspective, from a policy perspective, or even from a public health perspective, it's really important that those things are monitored, and that there is a conversation, there are guidelines, whatever needs to be put out there. It's good that people like Kirsten are leading the fight, but I think the government, the country as a whole, should be on top of those things to keep people safe. Otherwise, we might be confronted with some disasters that we want to avoid.
Absolutely. So again, just want to welcome anyone watching. You can also ask questions. I have hundreds of questions. Anyone who has met me will know I always have hundreds of questions, but very happy to bring the community in, and any questions you have about CGMs, about CGM accuracy, this is definitely the right forum to ask them. So I want to bring things now. We've had a look at the global and the policy perspective, a brief look. Now I want to bring it right back down to the human. Kirsten, if someone came to you and they said, I'm ready, I want to try a CGM, what advice would you offer when they want to choose their very first CGM? What advice would you give them?
Well, of course, I would say to use our 6 questions and to look at our wonderful fact sheet that we have now just put onto our website. But as a person living with diabetes, as this became a concern in my own life, I would definitely advise that you do your own research. It's really important to self-educate and to do your own research, because what you are seeing a lot of these companies are marketing and putting out there isn't always accurate. So it's really important to do a little bit of a deeper dive. The other thing that I think is really good is to, if you are going to test out a new device, is to test it alongside a device that you trust, or alongside our trusted finger stick method, so that you know that you are holding yourself safely when it comes to trying out a new device. You'll see on the top left-hand screen there, we've just put a link to the wonderful toolkit and to our web page where you can see where the 6 questions are. But I think in general, I would say reach out to community members, find out what people's experiences have been. We've seen a lot of chats on our WhatsApp group channels, as well as on online platforms. I know in Sweet Life, there's also a lot of talk about which CGMs do we trust. Has someone tried the CGM? Where do we go for information? I think it's really important to do your research.
Agreed. Patrick, I'm gonna throw the South Africa question at you. When we first started hearing about CGM accuracy issues here at home, a lot of doctors kind of had the approach that any CGM is better than finger sticks, and you could rely on CGM trends rather than actual glucose readings, because a lot of people are not testing their glucose levels at all, so a trend is better than nothing. I mean, I immediately was like, but how do you read a trend? Like, reading a trend requires a very high level of digital and health literacy. And then my second thought was, and why should the CGM manufacturers get away with not having accurate readings? But I'm curious, I can see the point of anything's better than nothing. What are your thoughts on this? You're a doctor, you know what the current state of affairs are.
No, that's yeah, it can be seen as a practical approach, but it can also be a very dangerous approach. Because obviously, as Kirsten described, the level of reliance that she has on her device, and it clearly leads to her making decisions in terms of the injection of that product that Holy Ray described as obviously a deadly product. We're talking about insulin. So because of that, it's not as easy as saying that any is better than nothing. I won't really go that route. I would rather go that the route to say, what can we do at our level to tighten things? What can we do to ensure that the product that is on market is of quality, and that the product of quality are being affordable, rather than to say, let's allow the market to be flooded by any type of product, and because it's better than nothing, then people can use it. I think the approach can be very, very dangerous. So I really wouldn't say that this should be our approach. I think we need to be cautious. I think we need to educate and advocate the way Kirsten and all of us are doing, to make sure that what is in the hand of the people is actually a good product. And I think if in other places they manage to make good product accessible and affordable, why not in South Africa? Yes, we have the description of low and middle income country. That doesn't mean we are in a dumping ground for any kind of product. So we are in that's why I said we need to elevate this to actually the regulatory bodies, because the same way people want to drive the safest car, why should we be complacent when it comes to CGMs? Meanwhile, with cars, we want the Germans or the whatever, and you want obviously the minimum of safety. When even I think people were talking about selecting car seats for their babies, and how people go through extensive research for car seat for the babies. So if let's not be double-minded, let's be standing on the side of science, and we can see this is an important matter. We are still at the beginning of uptake of CGMs in the country. So let's do it right, rather than having a different attitude.
I agree wholeheartedly. The argument of using it as a dumping ground, that really resonates with me. It's like saying, oh, here's all this contaminated food, but at least it's free. So you guys are hungry, don't you want to eat it? And I'm like, no, not if it's lethal. No thanks. Neo Monaghan has just given us this very long comment that I will briefly read, but I'm sure many people have seen this in the news, this urgent warning issued overseas for the Freestyle Libre 3 and the Libre 3 Plus, because there were 700 adverse events and 7 deaths with issues with sensors giving incorrect low glucose readings. Neo's comment also said SAPRA is only developing guidance documents recently, so the other concern is the expertise necessary to evaluate them. Well, that is why we have Priyanka in the room. So Priyanka, could you tell us globally, like the current global landscape when it comes to the way that CGMs are currently tested and how they're allowed to enter new markets? And how does this differ? For instance, you have a lot of experience with blood glucose monitors. Those are fairly regulated. So how do CGMs and blood glucose monitors differ in that case? And as Naya was saying, like when it comes to evaluating if a product is safe, how does that happen?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question, Bridget. And indeed, obviously, we know about this incident that just happened, and it's clear a very concerning regulatory oversight, and also lack of transparency in performance data, which is so essential. So you asked about the global landscape. So basically, on how CGMs are tested and approved is still very fragmented, and that's the key difference between how the blood glucose meters are regulated. So, I mean, for CGMs, we currently rely on a patchwork of guidelines. So as was mentioned in the comment, the SAPRA is, compiling these guidelines, and there are a lot of guidelines, but there is no unified global standard. There is the Clinical and Laboratory Standards Institute, the CLSI, that they have a guideline which describes useful performance metrics, but it doesn't really prescribe, how studies should be designed. what comparators to be used, what should be the minimum accuracy, minimum accuracy criteria that should be met. The US FDA have special, controls for their integrated CGM, which is the iCGM, and especially that is to connect to the systems like automated insulin delivery methods. But even those do not have those study design procedures. And while there is also the International Electrochemical Commission that have published, a standard touching on CGM performance, it simply points back again to ISO 15197. So it is basically the ISO standards for testing self-monitoring blood glucose systems. So which is neither realistic nor appropriate for CGM technology. So, and if you look from the regulation aspect, it also looks very different depending on which geographical region you are in. So like in the US, for example, CGMs are approved as medical devices, meaning they go through, these pathways that look at safety and performance, but not the actual lab-based rules that are generally very strict and rigorous for blood glucose meters. And CGMs also, some of the CGMs can also follow a faster route if they're shown to be similar to an existing device, while others would require a detailed review. In Europe, for example, CGMs have to meet the MDR regulations to receive the CE mark, which just checks things like technical evidence, clinical data, and manufacturing quality. There is an ongoing debate or discussion on adopting some of the US requirements in Europe, but we still do not have these clear detailed rules on how CGM studies should be designed or on how performance should be verified. So, this basically what I have just explained, it's just a stark contrast in the regulation of blood glucose meters, where expectations are so clear and rigorous and quite harmonized globally using the ISO standards, which are very strict. They have very strict accuracy thresholds. And that's why we urgently need a similarly rigorous standardized approach for CGMs. One that evaluates not just accuracy, but again, sensor stability, alerts, performance, reliability of the alerts along the full wear period, and obviously interferences. So we're just looking at, there are a lot of these established manufacturers which have excellent data, but then there are also these first-time manufacturers, and a lot of them that are coming in. So we need to ensure that they're all, safe, effective, and comparable on a global harmonized level. Yeah.
So if you said there's currently no ISO standards, does that mean anyone can make a CGM? Like, what does that actually mean? Are there just no rules? I'm getting more and more.
So
how messy that all sounded.
Yeah. So So, when we say that there are currently no ISO standards for CGMs, it essentially means that we don't have a globally agreed uniform benchmark, for what is good enough performance or safety look-alike for these devices. So, as ISO standards are international guidelines that define the best way of designing, and testing and evaluating a product. And so for glucose monitoring, as I mentioned, there's already a guideline, which sets these rigorous standards. But for CGMs, the kind of harmonized framework doesn't exist yet. So, we have different pockets of guidance materials from, like, let's say, the Clinical and Laboratory Standards Institute guidelines, FDA's guidelines, but nothing that really covers the full range of CGMs, use cases, and even performance scenarios. So basically, the manufacturers sometimes just lean on this mixed methods, just approach different methods and making it harder to compare those devices to each other at a consistent level. However, there is good news, though. There is light at the end of the tunnel. So just let me say that.
I was just thinking the first half is just being depressing, right? We're like,
I know. No, there is definitely light. And just wanted to share that. So the IFCC working group. So the IFCC is the International Federation for Clinical Chemistry, and so they have proposed, actually developed this comprehensive guideline that will form this basis of the future ISO standard. So, and this is important because CGM market is expanding. They're seeing this. They're seeing there are so many of these new manufacturers entering the market, and they want to make sure that all of them are, all of them are, established, entering development, and we want to make sure that they are, monitored and regulated at the same level, same benchmark. So this new guideline would be forming that kind of a floor, so as to say, that the new ISO standards can come. Yeah.
Fantastic. And also, there is a fact sheet that has been developed that lets individuals empower themselves. So, Kirsten, I'm going to throw this at you. How did this come about? How did the conversation start around developing this tool? What exactly is it? What were some of the concerns that you heard from the community around CGMs that were on the market and their accuracy? We've got this QR code to the tool. What is the tool? Tell us the story of the tool.
Wonderful. So basically, as chairperson of SA Diabetes Advocacy, we obviously work closely with community and we learn a lot about what's going on in the market. And there was one stage, I think it was almost 2 years back now, where there was a new CGM device coming into the market. And when we did our research, we learned that only 17 people, less than 17 people had been tested that were insulin dependent or living with type 1 diabetes before this product came to launch. And I think that really was the starting point that I started questioning, how is this a possibility? How is it possible that a device can be developed for people who are insulin dependent, who can have serious adverse effects by trusting this device on their daily management? And as I kind of started diving a little bit deeper into that, I just started asking questions, really. I mean, as you know, I'm a person living with diabetes, chairperson of SA Diabetes Advocacy, but it really has been this movement of talking to the likes of Priyanka at Find, learning with the work that they've been doing on a global scale. I reached out to people living with diabetes in the global market, so on the NHS, to find out if they had these devices available to them. And a lot of them were saying, actually, we removed some of these devices. Like, we had to advocate to get these devices removed because people living with diabetes or women who were pregnant and with gestational diabetes were relying on these devices during a very crucial point in their diabetes management. And they've actually had to advocate for removing some of these devices. And so we kind of just went through this whole journey together. And as I started learning, I got to connect with some really lovely people. And the more that I started questioning this, the more the question came up, like, what can we do in the interim? You know, if there are no ISO standards, how can we safely educate people living with diabetes? And the other thing that came up was not only people living with diabetes, but healthcare professionals, because a lot of doctors have also started to question, what devices can I trust? You know, when it comes to funders of these devices, when we look at the private healthcare like funders that are currently funding continuous glucose monitoring in South Africa, they're also starting to question, you know, which devices do we trust, which don't we? What parameters can we look at? There really was nothing available. So then we started the conversation with Find, and we worked with the IFDT, the International Institute for Diabetes Technology. The Institute for Diabetes Technology, and we developed sort of a framework of 6 questions that you can ask. And we really tried to simplify what that looks like. And we developed this wonderful tool. And I don't know if you want to go into how I basically use it as a person living with diabetes now, or if you want to revisit that a bit later.
No, tell us, please.
Cool. So I don't know if any of you have ever looked at a scientific journal or a paper or any form of evidence, but it is exceptionally daunting. And especially if you are not a doctor or you've never come across this kind of paperwork in your lifetime, it is very daunting. So I found it very difficult to try and scrutinize or understand what was even happening on these papers that I was finding. But what I did is the first thing I made sure was that any evidence that I was finding was actually published or was available in a medical journal or in a scientific journal. So making sure that this is actually real data and evidence that has been published and reviewed, that was the most important thing, and that I wasn't finding random information from a Facebook group or a ChatGPT or wherever, you know, like this was legit evidence that I was finding. And then what I did to try and crunch this information, because I couldn't quite understand everything, was I used a wonderful tool called Notebook LM, and there's another one called Open Evidence. But basically what you can do is you can actually upload your own resources that you get, and then it helps you to summarize or to understand the data that you've given it. So I think that's really important important, because when we use tools like ChatGPT, unfortunately, you're not always certain that it's pulling things from the right sources. So I think it's really important that you upload your own resources when you do your research. And then on the other side of that, when we look at these 6 questions, it's really important to note that this isn't the all and end all, that if there is some form of information missing, or there is some form of information that doesn't seem right and you're not quite sure about it, I really commend people to reach out to the distributors of these devices and ask for that information, because it very well could be out there, and you might just not be finding it in the print. And I think that is also the responsibility of the distributors of devices, that they are transparent and that they share information when asked about it. And then the last piece of information that I found, and this was via John Pemberton, who started Glucose Never Lies, and he worked with the Diabetes Specialist Nurse Forum on the NHS, and they developed this wonderful CGM comparison tool for all the CGMs that are available on the NHS. And you will see that, again, if you click on that link and you scroll all the way to the bottom, I've linked it there. But it was a wonderful chart of all the devices that are available, and it basically takes you through a very similar set of questions that we've developed, and you can basically see it as a comparison chart there. So I found that really useful, and I think the more you research, the more digging you go through. I mean, I've met so many interesting people now, and I've learned so much about the CGM market. But obviously, if you're a person living with diabetes who isn't in this environment all the time, it can be daunting. So I do just advise that you start small, start researching, start asking questions, and do your self-research.
But what's so great is you're not just saying to people, off you go do some research. You're saying, here's a document. This tells you step by step in 6 steps exactly what you need to do, which questions you need to ask, which bits are important, what are the red flags. And what's so great about that is that it's empowering individuals to be able to take charge of their own health. And I think a lot of the time in South Africa, what I find odd, because I don't think we're a particularly meek people. Patrick and Priyanka are not South Africans and can wholeheartedly agree it's allowed. But I don't think we're particularly meek people, but I think we don't often talk back to our healthcare providers and ask probing questions of the people who are manufacturing devices or of the people who are giving us our healthcare. And what's so great about this tool is that it's giving you the questions to ask. So it's not just saying, make sure it's safe. It's saying, ask this question. And if you don't understand this bit, then speak to the person who can give you the answer to this. So Patrick, I'm curious what you think about how doctors can use this tool. So how do you think doctors who prescribe CGM devices can use this tool, these 6 questions, this guide, to decide which devices are safe for people living with diabetes? And do you think doctors will use the tool?
Well, thank you, Bridget, for the question. Indeed, I think I can, before going back to the doctor, maybe reflecting on what you said, maybe what you describe as the meekness or the not questioning professionals. We don't see it a lot with people living with HIV. They are quite bold and quite
they are not
interrogative. Every time when I was told when the medication changed, they will ask. I think it was because of all the investments in terms of community empowerment and what they call treatment literacy that they did and that they are maintaining. So I guess when it comes to diabetes, maybe that's something that we need to look into as even we are educating people about CGMs. When it comes to the doctors, obviously, if you are expecting numbers that you want to rely upon, not only to make sure that the treatment that you're prescribing is working, but obviously the safety of your patient is utmost. Kirsten mentioned the prevention of complications. If all those are your concern, obviously, if you are introducing a device or a tool to your patient, you also want to know that it's accurate. You want to be able to trust that whatever conversation is happening around those numbers between you and your patient are actually a real conversation rather than just wishing for it for the better. So I think indeed the tool should probably be used by the doctors. I think one of the way to do this probably would be to ask them if they see benefit on that and what will be the uptake. But definitely, we already see a lot of doctors who don't know what CGMs are, continuous glucose monitoring are, But as we are making this device accessible for all, it's important that we don't leave doctors and nurses on the wayside. They need to be taken on board, and I'm sure this device or this tool developed by SAW's advocacy and partners is really critical to also allow them to start somewhere, because as it's not only daunting for lay people in quotes when you look at evidence and research, it's for everybody. But this allows you to start somewhere, and as you grow in your curiosity and in your knowledge, you are more confident in going even deeper into what you are researching. So I think it's really important that even doctors are sensitized and made aware of such a tool, so that they can also start applying. Because at the end of the day, accuracy, safety, and all those themes that we are debating or we are discussing this evening are also their concern when it comes to the patients, who are the people that they are looking after.
And that's such a good point, Patrick, that it's not only daunting to people who are living with diabetes, it's also to doctors, because they probably aren't reading scientific papers all the time, and also don't have a lot of time. Like all our healthcare workers, regardless of which department they're in South Africa, regardless of the background they're working in, everyone is overworked and overburdened and doesn't have enough time. So what I love about this is that it is simple and simplified without being dumbed down. So Priyanka, I'm so curious about the process of how you co-developed this. So it was FIND, SA Diabetes Advocacy, and the Institute for Diabetes Technology. How did you get down to only 6 questions? How and why did you create the CGM performance fact sheet? How did you narrow it all down and then manage to simplify it? I imagine quite a task.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that question, Bridget. And indeed, it was, what we heard, it was a very clear need, that we kept hearing again and again from people living with diabetes, and also from healthcare professionals that, and I quote, like, there is no easy way to judge the quality of evidence behind different CGMs. So, because the way the CGM studies can be, made are very, they can be very varied in how they're designed and who to include and how is the analysis data, how they analyze the data. So that can lead to very different accuracy results. And for the same reason, we have also seen some reviews in the journals, medical journals, that that have shown that up to 10-point difference in accuracy depending on the study. And we have seen cases where a person wearing 2 sensors of the same manufacturer by the same person at the same time gives noticeably different readings. So clearly, I mean, that's a serious red flag. So that creates uncertainty for users that can affect treatment choices. And to address this, of course, we partnered with SA Diabetes Advocacy and the IFTT in Germany, the Institute for Diabetes Technology. So SA Diabetes Advocacy came in with the language, with the experience, the expertise from the lived experience perspective, and the Institute for Diabetes Technology, they came more from their technical expertise. So while making this, we want to make sure that all the important aspects, which are very important for assessing an accuracy study, are included, so that we don't leave anything out. But at the same time, it should be clear, simple, and accessible, easy to understand, to make it into a practical tool. Again, just to overstate that, this is not a medical advice, but basically to act as a guidance tool to help users and clinicians make sense of the CGM studies and, asking the right questions, as Kirsten had mentioned earlier. So just to make sure of that. And then, of course, the 6 questions, which are very, straightforward. Of course, everybody can go onto the QR code that Kirsten has shared here. But at the same time, I'll just briefly take you through. So that was the study population. So the study population, which was included, like what were the kind of users or population that were included? Were there, the type 1 diabetes population or type 2 diabetes with insulin treated population, or no? So that it was tested in all high and low events. Second was how many people were included in the study. Of course, the more people, the more reliable the study. How much was the sensor wear time? What were the comparative measurements? So, was it worn in the entire length of the CGM sensor? Because as we all are aware that, CGMs, once they start, they're different a little bit in the middle, and towards the end, they might taper off in their accuracy. So we want to make sure that the full length of the bandwidth of the sensor wear time is tested. What was the glucose data distribution? So, the IFCC has guideline recommendations for CGM accuracy, show that some CGMs are less accurate in the low and the very high glucose ranges. So they should be tested in all ranges. If meal and insulin challenges were tested, performance during rapid rates of change, that can also affect the stability of the sensor. And we want to include that in the overall analysis. And finally, as Kirsten had alluded to earlier, is a study publication in a peer-reviewed journal. Yes. I think that really adds that scientific rigor and the seriousness of the manufacturer, that they really want to make sure that everybody, the people living with diabetes and the healthcare professionals, trust the product. So I think it also tells us that they are really serious of providing a good tool, good product. So this is something that we have been through since a couple of months. It's been a wonderful time in developing this tool. And just to provide a little bit of an update, so we are working on a version 2 to make it more visual, but it will be out soon.
It's so funny because as you were going through those questions, the thing I kept thinking was, how is it even necessary to say this? Like, how is it necessary that someone brought out a CGM and tested it either on people with type 2 who weren't on insulin or on people without diabetes, and they were like, no problem, guys, it works fine. You can use it when you're taking insulin. Like, that seems insane to me. But I'm so glad that now at least it's in black and white. We know which steps to follow. So we are almost out of time, but I don't think we can have a discussion about CGM in South Africa without discussing access in some way. So, Kirsten, I'd love you to tell us about the petition that you handed over, and as an intro into that, Nicole has asked us if the panel has any comments on access to insulin pumps and hybrid closed loop systems in South Africa, where the CGM and pump work together and may help further improve disease management. So I think if you want to touch on insulin pumps and then also on CGM access, and specifically CGM access in the public sector.
Wonderful. So just from a CGM access point of view, obviously we know that not even private funders were funding these devices, for 3 years ago. I think it's only been around 3 years, but it was the first time that the diabetes community actually came together to advocate for some form of change. And we were really successful with one of the biggest medical aid schemes in South Africa, now funding for all children under the age of 18 and kind of working on a tiered co-payment plan. So you'll see that a lot of medical aids do now cover funding for continuous glucose monitors. They differ from all the medical aids, but I think it's really important that you inquire with your medical aid, because it's often in the fine print what is available to you and what's not. And annually they tend to change what is available. A lot of medical aids also require some form of motivation, so it's really important that you work with your clinician. So it will have to be your healthcare professional who might have to prescribe or write a letter of motivation that you need this device for your diabetes management. So if you are in the private healthcare space, just please make sure that you are getting those motivations and that you are pushing for access, because there are many medical aids that are actually covering it. So it is really important that you push for that, because we've heard of a lot of community members who aren't aware of the wonderful benefits that are available to them. And a lot of medical aids also provide one free glucose or sensor per month without a co-payment. So it's really important to check what is available to you and to inquire with your medical aid. And then once we pushed for access in the private sector, we obviously realized that more than 85% of people in the South African context rely on the public healthcare system for their healthcare. So we decided that we wanted to go big and we wanted to push for CGM access for all children under the age of 18 in the public healthcare system that are living with type 1 diabetes. It has been a long time coming. We just 2 weeks ago at the Diabetes Summit that was hosted by Patrick over here with the Diabetes Alliance, we had the awesome opportunity to hand over the CGM access petition to the National Department of Health and to request a multi-stakeholder meeting early next year to discuss what the pathways are to actually making this happen for the the public healthcare sector. We do have confirmation of a follow-up meeting which will be taking place early next year. So we're really, really glad that this conversation has started and that we are making waves in terms of CGM CGM access.
Great. I put up Lorena's question because you were answering it without me even having had to say it. So that's fantastic. And then Patrick, while we're talking National Department of Health, public sector, do you know how tender processes work in the public sector? Why do they take into account things like CGM accuracy? Why is it so important that they take that into account when funders assess whether or not they should fund a CGM device? Because obviously a cheap and nasty device that's being shipped in without having done any scientific things is going to be appealing if it's cheap and can access a lot of people. How do you know how? I don't know if you do know. Do you know how tender processes work? I do not. So please teach me.
Yeah, thank you, Bridget. We should probably all educate ourselves a bit more on that. When listening to Dr. Priya, I can tell that the amount of work into producing probably a good, great CGMs, yeah, we shouldn't be surprised that those devices are expensive, because when she was describing testing it into high, when there's a high, testing it when there's a low, testing it over the 14, wow, you can imagine that it might take a lot of work to make sure that you have at the end of the day a good product. To go back then to your question about the tender, what the knowledge I have, it was a few years ago, Provider and we were discussing with the Department of Health, and we realized that at some point the committers were not available in the public sector, and it was because of not having been able to put a tender, because indeed you need to have technical specifications when you put out a tender so that people know what they are bidding against. So there's at that time, Provider obviously as a specialist provided some input into what they could consider when it comes to the tender at the time. But obviously, as Priya said, it was easier because obviously there's a lot of documentation already out there for the committers. It might not be the same. So it's important that as we are engaging in those discussions with the Department of Health, that we also bring that to the attention that two CGMs are not equal. That it's important that the why they should think about the quality, they should think about the accuracy, they should think about all those aspects. So I think they are open to it. They know that they don't have the skills to everything when they are procuring all those devices or drugs or whatever. But obviously, it will be just for them to be convinced that the person that they are engaging with is not a biased person, or is not coming because they're punching a specific product rather than the other, like an expert, to be able to guide them into to find the experts who will be coming just to bring up that aspect. It will be it's very important. So I think part of the conversation that I'm having, and I'm encouraged that Ms. Hunter and her colleagues are really taking this seriously. I think they've understood the message about the importance, probably for the quality of life and even for the clinical aspect of managing diabetes, that CGMs are important. So as we are engaging in those conversations with them, we need to also pant the importance of the accuracy, the importance of the quality of the product, and volunteer or suggest that if there needs to be some expert, there are people that we can guide and that they can work with when they decide eventually to put out the tender.
Yeah, great advice. And have some lived experience on that panel. Wouldn't that be nice? Neo has asked a question that I want to throw at Priyanka. Would it help for patients to validate these devices by themselves against the self-monitoring blood glucose that they're already using? I'm not sure if he means like individually, so you know yourself if you can trust it, or if there's any kind of data pooling that could be useful with that.
I mean, individually, of course, there are some CGMs which are non-adjunctive or adjunctive. So non-adjunctive, which do not require that SMBG, self-monitoring blood glucose, calibration, or require SMBG calibration. But I mean, yes, you in a way. I mean, the patient can check. That can help with confidence and safety. For their day-to-day spot checks using. That can build confidence. If someone sees that a CGM is generally aligned with their SMBG, then they're more likely to trust the device, right? But honestly, they cannot replace independent standardized evaluations of CGM accuracy. I mean, we still need that robust regulatory oversight and performance testing to make sure the devices are safe for all users, especially those who may not even have that expertise to troubleshoot or to calibrate.
Yeah. And also don't have the resources, right? Because if you're lucky enough to be able to afford a CGM,
afford the
you're not
test strips.
Able to afford test strips, they cost so much money. I think the advice that I was given was that if your blood sugar doesn't match the way you're feeling doesn't match what your CGM tells you, or if you're very high or very low and things are changing fast. Kirsten, do you want to explain the car analogy? I feel like that was a really helpful way of looking at this.
Yeah, I think I'll just touch points on that because there definitely is a lack of education around interstitial fluid, which a lot of continuous glucose monitors measure versus blood glucose. So you will often see a time delay between what you'll see on your blood glucose meter versus what you'll see on your continuous glucose monitor. So I do really advise people there's some wonderful YouTube videos that you can self-educate yourself around interstitial fluid versus blood glucose. So I think it is important to know that you very seldom will get a point for point exact measurement between your continuous glucose monitor and your blood glucose monitor. And then just to touch on the car analogy that Bridget just asked about. So what we did is we took Fine's wonderful tool and we adapted it with a car analogy. And it's very similar to what Patrick was talking about earlier when it comes to a pilot with a plane. So on our checklist, you'll see that we've added an extra column and we've added a car analogy because it really is just around the questions that you would ask yourself when you buy a car. Would you buy a car that has not been tested on sharp turns? Or a car that has never driven on a gravel road or been in rain before? Or imagine driving a car that's never been tested in rapid rates of change, like going at a fast speed and then slowing down. So very much when we did the launch webinar with Find a couple of months ago, Stefan Pleece actually spoke about this car analogy, and it was the first time that it really kicked for me why CGM accuracy is so important. Because when you look at a tool that you're depending on to get you from A to B safely, it's really important that it's been tested correctly and that you know that this device that you are trusting, you literally can trust it with your life.
So important. I'm going to end there because I don't think anyone else is going to be able to say anything to top that as a final statement. I want to thank everyone so much for joining us this evening. Thank you to Kirsten de Klerk, Chairperson of SA Diabetes Advocacy, Dr. Patrick Ngasa-Pyoti, Chairperson of Diabetes Alliance, and Dr. Priyanka Singh, one of the scientists from Find. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise. Thank you to all our audience members and for the really excellent questions. SA Diabetes Advocacy is going to have this video available on all their social media channels. So if you joined later or were unable to catch the whole thing, you can watch the replay there. And the QR code is up there, or you can go to their website, diabetesadvocacy.org.za, and there is a very obvious CGM accuracy matters headline there. If you click that, it will give you the tool. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to the expert panelists for sharing your time, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.